As team leader at UAOH, Goro knows that the key to assembling a giant robot is to give every team member involved an appropriate designation that clearly describes their function and conveys appropriate dignity that builds team morale. When Yuji forms the arms, he's in arm mode.
Arm mode.
Naturally, because the girls form the legs, they're
Bottom mode.
bottom mode? Color me intrigued, but I think Goro's getting a visit from OHHR in the 5th episode of Ozio. We are so back, baby! One of my favorite things to do in Mighty Morphin Zyurangers was to look at a Sentai two-parter that got adapted into a single episode in America. Nearly every time it resulted in an absolute curb stomp because the original storyline had to be watered down into near incoherence. Yeah, I'm not beating around the bush this time, am I? Also, this is just a very important story, where we introduce the giant robots and combine them into a gianter robot, a staple of these series. While Ohranger doesn't build this up quite as much as we saw in Zyuranger, it's still treated as an event, a turning point for the heroes, and a major threat the villains are determined to stop in its tracks. While Power Rangers doesn't force the Zords into the first episode this time around, but instead devotes this episode to establishing their creation, it still doesn't have the time to give this the weight it deserves. Let's look at how. I think it's fair to say that both of these franchises exist on a sliding scale of technological versus mystical. Some installments base their stories and powers on one side, and some do the other. The interesting thing is that Mighty Morphin Power Rangers jumped in the complete opposite direction of its source material. Zyuranger is as mystical as it can be. The heroes come from an ancient civilization, their powers are magic, the giant robots are actually not giant robots, but sentient gods who talk and pass judgment on the mere mortals. Their story is written in a dusty old book like a fairy tale. Mighty Morphin Power Rangers is decidedly not that. It goes in hard on technology being the basis for everything, which led to a lot of disconnect in that shared footage. In fact, every season of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers adapted a Sentai that was more mystical based. Because Power Rangers Zeo is part of the same continuous narrative, the Power Rangers technology focus carries over here. Lucky for them, Ohranger is the first technology-heavy Sentai since Jetman, the Sentai series directly preceding Zyuranger. Jetman and Ohranger definitely seem more like the kinds of series Haim Saban would have preferred adapting in the first place, and because of that, Ohranger and Power Rangers Zeo mesh a bit better. The balance on that scale is practically the same. Both series have powers derived from an ancient mystical source. For Zeo, it's the Zeo Crystal. For Ohranger, as will come up in today's episodes, it's like nature and the planet and the life stream or whatever. But in terms of the actual hardware that's powered by that source, it's all modern technological applications. The only main difference is that Ohranger is a military organization with funding and a public face, and lots of rarely seen staff members who build all this stuff but don't get any credit. In Zeo, it's just Billy on a mountain with a box of scraps. A bit harder to swallow, but the premise is close enough that it allows the basic structure to carry over. For example, it makes sense for Power Rangers to repurpose the shots of the Ohranger hangar bay. It fits with their technological aesthetic. Zyuranger couldn't provide anything like this. It makes sense for Billy to say they have a secret Zord base in the mountains. About the only thing that doesn't fit is the UAOH branding, but it's not like the Mighty Morphin arsenal didn't have Zyuranger plastered all over it. So in both episodes, the teams are struggling to complete their giant robots before the enemy can find them and stop them. In Ohranger, that involves kidnapping Chief Miura and a child who is very dear to him and using said child as bait to get him to talk. And that leads to huge dramatic revelations about the past, the team being split up so one group can save Miura and the other can fight the giant monster, Yuji and Momo getting their butts kicked because they have to take their Choriki mobiles into battle without the others, and it culminates in the Ohrangers having to find the blueprints and tap into the power of teamwork to finish building their robots without the help of their chief. In Power Rangers, this results in a handful of cogs wandering around the desert. They briefly menace Bulk and Skull. The Power Rangers fight them for like a minute or two. That's it. Oh, and then later when the monster happens, Billy worries that the Zords haven't had time to be tested yet, but they're fine. Yeah, that's it. This is what happens when you cut a two-part story down to one. You don't have time to do anything. And for the purposes of this video, it's hard to compare the details when one has details and the other doesn't. But Ohranger has its story, while Power Rangers Zeo has something completely different. We'll get to that. Let's talk about what Ohranger does. In the past, Miura was taking one of those military standard car rides with his military best friend Indo, and Indo's non-military young daughter Mitsuko, affectionately called Mikko-chan. Well, driver safety goes belly up, as does the car, which tumbles over a cliff. Miura is left holding on to the other two, one in each hand. Miura can't lift both of them. Indo pries himself free of Miura's grip, tumbling to his death, but allowing Miura to save the child. A new Baranoia monster, Bara Brain, preys on Miura's feelings of guilt by kidnapping Miko and using her to voice the sentiments Miura fears are true. Bara Brain has psychic powers, so he can possess Miko to say she blames Miura for her father's death, and that his failing to cooperate with Baranoia will also cause hers. It's effectively creepy to hear Bara Brain's voice come out of Miko's mouth. To his credit, while Miura is clearly wounded by the accusations, they're never enough to break him. He recognizes that Miko is being manipulated to say these things, that this isn't real. He still holds fast to the greater good, that even if this person he cares deeply for is in danger, it's not worth it to save her if he sells out all of humanity. Bara Brain, to his credit, adapts. When the taunting doesn't work, he escalates to plain old torture. He uses his telekinetic powers to fling Miko around the landscape. And when his powers don't quite get the job done, he gets some help from a few obvious wires and by looping the film. I guess he stole that from watching OZO. I'm going to need to talk to my lawyers. Ultimately, while Goto, Shohei, and Judy save Miura, he gives himself up again in order to distract Baranoia so that the Ohrangers can rescue Miko instead. This changes the plan so that in the second part, Baranoia gives the Ohrangers an ultimatum to hand over the plans for their new weapons within an hour, or else Miura will be executed. Beating the clock becomes the driving tension as the Ohrangers struggle to finish their Choriki mobiles without Miura. This is without a doubt the strongest story Ohranger has done up to this point. Remember that the third episode of Ohranger does something similar, with Baranoia trying to get Ohranger info out of a child. This episode succeeds in every way that episode fails. This centers the drama and tension on a character we're actually supposed to care about, rather than a random kid we don't, while the hero tags along out of pure obligation. There is a real relationship between Miura and Miko. What's at stake is personal for both of them. And I love that the show is letting us get to know Miura despite the fact that he's not an Ohranger. However, that's also my issue with this. I remember thinking when I first watched this episode that it's really weird to see the show developing Miura when I still have no idea who any of the Ohrangers are, what their personalities are, or how they relate to each other, despite now being 7 episodes in. This would be like if Mighty Morphin Power Rangers opened by devoting an episode to Bulk and Skull's backstory before establishing that Jason loves martial arts, Kimberly's a gymnast, and Billy's a nerd. It's not that I don't appreciate this, it's just that the show's priorities seem a little misaligned. The interesting thing, though, is that Miura is played by Miyauchi Hiroshi, who had previously played Ohranger in the original Himitsu Sentai Go Ranger, the very first entry in the franchise, which came out 50 years ago this year, incidentally. I guess, technically, from that perspective, we are devoting an episode of the series to developing one of the heroes. It's just not the hero of this series. Like I said, priorities are a little misaligned. Remember that while these are the 6th and 7th episodes of Ohranger, we're jumping back now to the 3rd episode of Power Rangers Zeo. You know, because Power Rangers couldn't wait any longer to get the giant robots into the show. We need Zeo Megazord power now! But that means this is the first regular episode of the series. It shows off changes to the established sets. Angel Grove High School gets a new study area that becomes the primary location to film anything school-related this year. The Youth Center has been revamped to scrub away its early 90s aerobic-obsessed aesthetic. No more bright colors for you, it's grungy brick walls now because it's the mid-90s and we're all irony-poisoned. But more importantly, this gives us a chance to get to know our new main character, Tanya. I'll be honest with you, Tanya kind of breaks my brain to think about. MMPR ended with all the kid versions of the Power Rangers going through portals in time and reconnecting with their ancestry in order to find their portion of the Zeo Crystal. Rocky, for example, gets to meet his grandfather when his grandfather was a kid. Aisha ends up in Africa but decides to stay and help the animals there because Karen Ashley left the show. She instead sends Tanya, a local girl, back in her place. So, isn't Tanya from the past? I'm not sure exactly when. It's implied that Aisha meets her great aunt, but that person's already an adult, so it can't be that far in the past. Tanya's backstory about her parents being missing explorers is carried over into Power Rangers Zeo. She later meets up with them in the present, but maybe that's explained because Zordon says that Aisha staying in the past brings her own parents back to her for some reason, so maybe Tanya's parents did... I don't know. I've never understood this. But again, I never watched Power Rangers Zeo as a kid, so I always assumed this aspect of her character was dealt with. It's a very interesting idea, something Power Rangers had never tackled to this point, that of introducing a character who has to adjust to a new time and culture. And that's not even getting into the fact that she apparently skipped over very formative years of her own adolescence. This should be an absolute nightmare for Tanya to navigate. But as soon as she gets here, she's just a regular teenager. What Tanya is if the first episode of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers had Zordon say,
Billy, I have chosen you to be a Power Ranger because of your genius intellect. There is literally no other reason you are here except for this one trait.
And then, after the first episode, Billy's intelligence is completely scrubbed from his character, it's never mentioned again, and he just exists as a generic blank slate for the rest of his tenure. Honestly, if they weren't going to do anything with it, they should have just recast Aisha and kept that character going with a new actress. Because honestly, that's all Tanya really is. All that to say... Yeah, I'm sorry, this took a while. All that to say, we get our first Tanya episode, and rather than it being, what is this country? What is this time period? What is high school? What is the internet? Last time I checked, I was 12! We instead get, oh, I'm just a new girl at a new school and I hope I make friends and the star baseball player likes me but he wants to cheat on his algebra test and I don't like that. This is far too generic a story for this character. It also has nothing to do with the Zeo Megazord. I'd say the structure of a show like this tends to be at its best when its plot elements are thematically linked. Take the last Ohranger episode we covered. The episode is about two brothers. The monsters see themselves as brothers. And while Yuji is dropped into the middle of it like a random bystander, at least lip service is paid to the idea that he resents being an only child. Compare that to this, where there's a plot about Tanya's boyfriend Sean wanting to cheat on an algebra test. I forgot to write that detail. This is not that kind of story. There's a plot about Tanya's boyfriend Sean wanting to cheat on an algebra test, and there's a plot about a monster who requires Zords to defeat. Those two ideas are about as far apart from each other as humanly possible. That's where you can really see Power Rangers frantically stitching together the Japanese story with their own. And I know it's unfair of me to Monday morning quarterback this 30 years later, especially when they were rushing to get out 40 to 50 episodes a year. But this is a show that's already half written to begin with, you just have to connect the dots. Power Rangers likes episode titles that have multiple meanings, or are a pun or a reference. This episode is called The Shooting Star, obviously because they noticed that Bara Separate has a star-shaped body. I immediately saw that and wondered, why can't that also be a reference to Sean? Make him the star! A college baseball recruiter is scouting him, and that gives Sean a specific incentive to prioritize baseball, as well as an overinflated sense of importance that he's above algebra grades. It's a hackneyed plot, but at least it's a specific motivation with a specific lesson to learn when things don't go his way. The Ohranger episode talks about teamwork because it's a story about combining the robots, which this also is. So why not have the Power Rangers decide to work together to tutor Sean in algebra? That's what's frustrating about this. This is supposed to be a story about Tanya, but she's completely incidental. She worries over wanting to fit in, but then she's never tempted to go along with the popular baseball player. She's solidly in the anti-cheating camp from minute one, and that never wavers. At one point, Tanya goes to her friends for advice, but they're interrupted by Zordon before she can even say what the problem is, and the story never comes back to it. Then the dilemma solves itself while she's gone as Sean changes his mind for absolutely no reason. It's not only completely unrelated to whatever the monster is supposed to be about, it's not even satisfying on its own. Well, if the monster is about nothing and this is about nothing, does that make nothing a theme? Is this Power Rangers Seinfeld Force? This is a mess of a plot and a waste of a character. It's a waste of two characters. And a monster. Actually, two monsters. You might have noticed that I mentioned a Bara Separate in the last segment, which is not the same as the Bara Brain that I referenced earlier. No, this is not footage from a different Ohranger episode that Power Rangers randomly pulled in. The Ohranger story actually has two monsters. Bara Brain is around for the psychological torture segment of our program, and Bara Separate exists for the Big Fighty Robots vignette. It's a bit sloppy, but they tie it together somewhat. Bara Brain has Bara Balls, I guess, and he can turn his shiny balls into his own monster, Bara Separate, who is so called because he can pull in separate objects to make a shell for himself. I didn't mention any of this before because, honestly, it's not all that important to the story. It's just there to give the Ohrangers something else to fight. Because Power Rangers Zeo doesn't adapt any of the story elements about Miura and Miko, Bara Brain is tossed out entirely, and Bara Separate becomes Staroid, which is obviously a reference to stars and maybe steroids? Hey, that ties into baseball, especially in the latter half of the 90s. Why couldn't that have been Sean's issue? Okay, no, Power Rangers would not do that. It's a shame because Bara Brain is the far more interesting villain. It's also a shame because Bara Separate's only distinguishable feature is what ties him to Bara Brain, and that makes the ending kinda difficult to adapt. In the original, the Ohrangers are getting beaten up by Bara Separate until the Earth or nature or something decides that they can combine their robots, so they combine their robots, I guess. I don't know, it's nonsense. Okay, look, the Ohranger episode isn't perfect either, but what works well... Okay, it doesn't work well, but what makes sense is that they use their Ohranger Robo to destroy Bara Separate, revealing the ball inside, which is still alive and starting to reform. They realize they need to kill the ball to destroy the monster, so they do. The end. It's not great, but it is a logical setup and payoff. Because Power Rangers doesn't have Bara Brain and Staroid isn't made from a ball, he just has a ball form... because. And when the Zeo Megazord doesn't kill Staroid the first time, what's their strategy?
We gotta use more power.
Right! Oh, more power! I don't know why we didn't think of that before. I guess we were just using less power. Those batteries aren't gonna charge themselves. Let's score these, and spoilers, this is easy. I think it should be obvious already that Ohranger wins on both story and characters. I mean, it's not even close. The Ohranger teamwork message might feel somewhat tacked on and obligatory, but at least it has a story, at least its monsters have a role, and at least its focused character actually contributes to the story in some way. So while that makes the winner apparent already, let's look at action. Power Rangers, again, suffers from cutting out a whole episode's worth of content. Ohranger has Bara Brain's creepy introduction at an amusement park. It has the whole sequence of Bara Brain torturing Miko. It has Bara Separate chasing Goro and Miura as they escape in a jeep. There's even a cute moment in the mecha fight where they cut an enemy ship in half that Power Rangers doesn't use. The Yuji and Momo go off on their own beat doesn't really live up to its hype, which is why I barely talked about it. It really only serves to add another threat to the end of episode cliffhanger, after which they're perfectly fine and it never comes up again. Still, like everything else I just listed, it's a whole fight sequence that Power Rangers doesn't use. Instead, Power Rangers has a stock cog fight, and it has Tanya lecturing Sean at the batting cages. Yeah, Ohranger wins. Another clean sweep. And unlike last time, where both episodes were kinda underwhelming, this time Ohranger certainly deserves the accolades. It could have been more polished, but it's still really good. Whew, I got to let off some steam on that one. But now, let's get to the viewer comment from the last episode of OZO. Bag of Magic Food jumped on the idea of Rocky solving the problem. Between breeding the monster plant and coming up with that oxygen gun thing, this may have furthered the theory that Blue Ranger powers confer super intelligence. Feel free to joke about Rocky being a high intelligence, low wisdom character. Yeah, I guess that could be a thing. The next demoted from Red to Blue Ranger is TJ, and he has that thing in Power Rangers in Space where he comes up with a plan to defeat the Psycho Rangers. Are there any other Blue Rangers who were considered the smart ones of their group? I haven't seen Lost Galaxy, or in Space for that matter, but isn't Kendrix the Pink Ranger the smart one? And then there's RPM, where their Blue Ranger's main trait is that he's Scottish. Haven't seen that either. But the funny thing is that the comment right next to this one had a slightly different interpretation. Skibot9974 says, I'm pretty sure Zeo in general made Rocky an idiot. It feels like the moment Rocky put on a blue shirt, his IQ cut in half. So, apparently the jury is still out on whether Rocky is smarter or dumber. Which makes sense to me because he's both the smartest and dumbest character in this particular episode. Maybe that's the high intelligence, low wisdom thing that Bag of Magic Food was talking about. So, thanks for watching. I hope you had a good time. I hope that you'll comment on the video, give it a like, and support me on Patreon if you can, especially if you want to see your name in the credits or watch these videos early. I'll see you next time!